federal judge in Florida today issued a smackdown of President Obama's Health Care Act by invalidating the individual mandate aspect of the plan. This is a victory for individuals and a victory for states' rights. It's a victory for fidelity to the Constitution. But what does it mean as far as the full repeal of Obamacare is concerned? Here now on this health care invalidation battle, Randy Barnett, professor of constitutional law at Georgetown University Law Center. Professor Barnett, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Hi, Judge.
So the
Judge
in Florida had a lot of challenges before him. 26 states said the things the federal government wants to force us to do, it doesn't have the authority to do. And some individuals said the things it's trying to force us to do, it doesn't have the authority to do. And some health care providers said the same thing, and some insurance carriers said the same thing. The judge only ruled on one aspect of this, the individual mandate, forcing people to buy health insurance, and then somehow said the rest of it's unconstitutional as well. Can you explain, please?
Well, what the judge said is that the individual mandate is not severable from all the other parts of the bill. The government had compared the bill to a finely made watch. And what the judge said is he can't very well pull out one part of that watch and say, well, here's the parts of the watch that should stay and here's the parts of the watch should go. So basically, he said, I can't make that decision. So in some sense, the whole watch has to go until this thing is finally decided.
All right. What about the parts that are of the law that have already kicked in, like you can get health insurance from your parents' policy up to age 26, or if you have pre-existing conditions, a carrier can't turn you down? What happens to people in that situation?
Well, you know, I haven't studied the opinion that closely. I do know that the judge did not issue an injunction to bar the operation of the bill and said that the federal government would have to respect it. And after all, his ruling would only apply within his jurisdiction in the 11th Circuit, and so, or within his district in Florida, not to the rest of the country.
Right.
So really, I mean, in realistic terms, this is not over. This has to go to the 11th Circuit, it has to go to the 4th Circuit, it has to go to the 6th Circuit, and eventually, now that it's on expedited appeal in the 4th Circuit, we can be very sure that it's, or we can be very confident that it's going to go to the Supreme Court in the very next term, in 2011.
One of the statements made by Judge Vinson, his rationale in this opinion, was just because Congress can regulate interstate commerce doesn't mean Congress can force you to engage in commerce, because inactivity, a decision not to engage in interstate commerce, not to buy health insurance, is not regulable by Congress. And then he said, if this were not so, then Congress could regulate everything. It could make us eat broccoli 3 times a week or wear hats in the sun so we don't get skin cancer. Does Congress understand this kind of a rationale?
He said that, you know, the government is asking us to believe that the people who threw off rule by Great Britain because they were imposing a tea tax set up a government that could actually make you buy the tea itself. And he said that he just didn't think that that was a plausible reading of the Constitution.
What's your feel about how this goes? Suppose, and maybe it's a little unfair, Professor, but I do know you're one of the country's foremost watchers and analyzers of the Supreme Court. Suppose this somehow made its way to the Supreme Court tomorrow with the makeup of the court as it is. How do you see this playing out there? 5-4,
well,
and which way?
Well, look, first, I've heard from people who talk to the people who watch the court even more closely than I do. And a year ago, they were saying this was a no-brainer. This challenge had no chance whatsoever. And apparently, the people that watch the court closely think they all agree this is a 5-4 case. And so it's all going to depend on, you know, whoever the swing vote might be, with the liberals on one side and the conservatives on the other side. And then we're going to have to look and see what the conservative justices did. Remember, in the Raich case, the medical marijuana case I tried, we lost that case 6-3. We did not hold all the conservatives on the limitation of the Commerce Clause theory that we were advancing. So, you know, you can't take the conservatives for granted, but most people think 5-4.
Can you say Anthony Michael Kennedy as the swing vote?
Well, you know, I'm not, you know, I think a lot of the justices on the right side of the court will be potential swing votes. I don't think we can take any of them for granted. This case has to be argued very well. The opinions below have to be very strong, and there has to be a compelling argument made. It's not going to be decided strictly on political lines.
Randy Barnett, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Judge.
And then there's Egypt. If Mubarak is out, who's in? Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, on what's at stake for America. Next. Egypt's dictator Hosni Mubarak tenuously holds on to power this evening after days of unprecedented protests. Mubarak has named a new government and even a vice president for the first time in his 30-year reign. But the Egyptian people are unsatisfied, calling for his complete removal and pushing forward with demonstrations that are destabilizing the entire Middle East. It calls to mind the words of former President John F. Kennedy, who said that, quote, "Those who make peaceful revolutions impossible make violent revolutions inevitable." But would new leadership in Egypt be good or bad for America? Joining me now, former ambassador to the United Nations in the administration of President George W. Bush, John Bolton. Mr. Ambassador, welcome here.
Glad to be here.
A couple of basics. How will the unrest in Egypt affect Americans, if at all?
Well, I think the immediate effect, obviously, is to put at risk Americans who are in Egypt. That's why many are leaving. That will have a knock-on effect on American investment and American tourism in Egypt. But the bigger implication depends on the outcome of the struggle that we're seeing in Cairo now. And I think that's very hard to predict, but it has enormous implications for the United States.
Is the $30 billion that we have given to the Mubarak regime over the years, I think it's about $1.5 billion a year, or it's up to that now, been money well spent or money wasted and used by a dictator to suit his own purposes?
Well, I think a lot of the money has been wasted. I speak as a former official of the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Right.
But let's remember why the money was put in the first place. It was a result of the 1979 Camp David Accord bringing peace between Egypt and Israel. And that was part of the price for the Egyptians to sign on to it. So in terms of the U.S. most important strategic interest, preserving the stability of the Egyptian-Israeli peace in the Middle East, I think that money was well spent.
Should the United States just stay out and watch what happens and let the Egyptian political process decide for itself? Or should we use a silent hand to try and affect the outcome of this?
I think we should be working behind the scenes. Honestly, I think it's a mistake for United States leaders to say too much one way or the other. The ability of the spoken word to affect much, I think, is overstated. I think we need to be more in touch with the Egyptian military, the Egyptian civil society, to try and find out what's going on and to try and see what we can do behind the scenes.
Well, what would we do? Which side would we take? I mean, President Mubarak, who's 83 years old and whose term expires this October.
He's going to leave anyway. Well, I think what precipitated the demonstrators in part was that Mubarak wanted to pass on the presidency to his son.
Right.
Well, that for sure we can say is
now may be wanting to pass it on to someone who's more hated than he is, the head of their hated intelligence services.
Well,
he's filled the vice president's job for the first time in 30 years.
Yeah.
That sounds weird to the American ear.
This is the military's plan B, and I don't think you can have a successful transition in Egypt without the military being on board, much like the situation in Pakistan. So this is a case where talking about abstractions is very, very difficult. And today, Mubarak did authorize negotiations with the opposition, which I'm sure is going to be an important step.
What about Mohammed al-Baradei, who's very Americanized? You know him well. I mean, has a law degree from New York University Law School here in New York City, purports to be a Democrat, lowercase d. Yet the Israelis are worried about him because of a couple of zingers he's thrown at them. And should we be worried that the Camp David peace accords are only with the Mubarak government and not with the state of Egypt?
Well, I think we should be worried about al-Baradei because despite his time in the United States, or maybe because of it, I think he displayed a consistently anti-American bias during his time at the IAEA, and he displayed a consistently pro-Iran bias to thwart our efforts to bring Iran's nuclear program under control.
Is it our role to interfere with his ascending to the presidency, or should we let the political process play itself out there?
Well, in that sense, I think we should let the political process play itself out because he has no support base in the Egyptian political body politic.
Prediction, Mubarak makes it till when?
I think he'll stay for a short period of time, but I think the next president is Omar Suleiman. And I think that
Omar Suleiman is the head of the intelligence forces
the
that
new
President
vice president
Mubarak just named as vice president 2 days ago.
Right, exactly. I think the military is a key player here, and I think that you shouldn't underestimate the respect of the Egyptian people for the military. I don't think the military wants to fire on the people at all, but I think the military can play a much more prominent role than people may see.
Will Suleiman becoming president satisfy those in the streets who really want a liberal Democrat, lowercase l, lowercase d, by Egyptian standards?
I don't know, but I wouldn't necessarily think that everybody using the words democracy and related words in the streets really intends that or means that, specifically the Muslim Brotherhood.
Understood. Mr. Mr. Ambassador. John Bolton, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now a few items from our Freedom File. The Conservative Political Action Conference, the largest conservative political gathering of the year. And according to its website, the organizers of the event are going to give Donald Rumsfeld the, quote, Defender of the Constitution Award. Yes, the Donald Rumsfeld, who believes in undeclared wars. The same Donald Rumsfeld who believes in Guantanamo Bay. The same Donald Rumsfeld who believes in torture. The same Donald Rumsfeld who wants to lock people up after they've been found not guilty. This is absurd. Donald Rumsfeld is arguably one of the greatest violators of the Constitution in modern history. This shows how removed some conservatives really are from the guarantees of the Constitution. Have you ever seen those bumper stickers that say, quote, don't steal, the government hates competition? Well, it's true. It seems the TSA can't take any competition. Its chief, John Pistole, blocked new airports from opting out of the TSA, which would allow airports to conduct security screenings with a private company. He claims not to see any advantage to privatized security checkpoints. It's not surprising that one of Cousin Janet's deputies would not want to see the advantage of upholding the constitutional rights of travelers. What would society be without government-run porn and grope checkpoints? How about a system that would uphold our rights, treat travelers with dignity, and perhaps even lead to better, safer, and more efficient security at our airports? The city of Atlanta, Georgia, is looking to close its Red Dog Narcotics Police Unit. 3 officers in this unit allegedly pulled over Sean Venegas and strip-searched him on a public street in broad daylight. No drugs were found on Mr. Venegas. Even if they had been found, this public strip search is an enormous affront to his dignity, let alone his Fourth Amendment rights. But the Constitution means little to this police unit, which also raided an Atlanta gay bar without a warrant in 2009. If the city of Atlanta truly cared about justice and about protecting the rights of its residents, it has no choice but to end the Red Dog unit. A free society has no place for police who behave like this. But federal prisons have plenty of room for them. California Congressman Tom McClintock has a plan to cap the debt and avoid default, and it's very simple. So why will it horrify the White House? Find out next.